Okay, so the list keeps growing, but we'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time. My name is Patrick Gall. I'm the Executive Director of the National Technology Security Coalition. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to be co-hosting this event with Checkpoint Software Technologies and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. I'll be introducing our guest in just a few minutes. I want to tell you a little bit about the NTSC. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan trade association. I tell people that the abbreviated narrative on the NTSC is our mission is to be the national voice of the Chief Information Security Officer in Washington, D.C. We're predominantly focused on policy issues like national data breach notification legislation, federal privacy legislation, workforce development, critical infrastructure, thus today's event, and strengthening the public-private partnership by helping to collaborate between our congressional leaders, between Chris Krebs and his team, and other federal agencies across Washington, D.C. It's my pleasure today to introduce our two speakers, Maddie Epstein, who is the head of global head of industrial control systems with Checkpoint Software Technologies. Maddie's joining us today from Tel Aviv. Welcome, Maddie. And Matt Kelley, and Matt's got a long title. He's the Associate Director, Cyber Strategy Performance Resources at the Cybersecurity Division at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And Matt, we're delighted to have you here today. I'm going to let the two of you introduce yourselves just a little bit more, and I'll start with Maddie. I'm going to disappear right after that and let you take it forward, and I hope you have a great conversation. I will come back during the Q&A period. And again, folks, there's a chat function. And if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and tee it up now. The earlier you get your questions in, the more likely they are to be asked. Okay, so Maddie, all over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. So good morning, everybody. I hope that you will excuse to my Israeli accent, but this is the only way I can speak English. I work for Checkpoint, as I was introduced. For the last 5 years, I'm leading the ICS security solutions the Checkpoint offers worldwide, globally. I'm less technical. I'm more dealing with the aspects of concept of solutions, how to secure critical infrastructure of any kind, manufacturing facilities. And I hope that I would be able to bring to you today some experience that I have from the last 10 years in this industry. So this is who I am. Thank you, and I hope it will be an enjoyable event. Thanks a lot.
And good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. So I'm Matt Kelley. As Patrick mentioned, I'm the Associate Director of Strategy, Performance, and Resources for the Cybersecurity Division of CISA. CISA is about a $1.7 billion agency under the Department of Homeland Security. The Cybersecurity Division itself is about 1.2 billion of that, so we're about 70% of the entire agency's workforce and budget. My background is primarily in IT consulting and in building organizations. I'm actually a relatively new Fed as of early 2017. Prior to that, background in helping to build organizations like the NASDAQ Japan stock market with SoftBank during the dot-com era, and then got involved with Homeland Security from a contracting perspective post 9/11. And started my own company in 2006, which I sold my half of it in 2016. So, you know, within CISA and within the Cybersecurity Division, industrial control systems is a big focus for us. Obviously, my particular group takes on many of these initiatives, what we call strategic initiatives that require a cross-agency and oftentimes an interagency approach and even an inter-community approach to focus on priorities and make sure that we achieve concerted effort. So I'm glad to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay. So I believe that we have to discuss, and the idea, as far as we understand in this session, is to raise the challenges, raise some questions that are definitely type of questions that you in the audience are struggling with when you're looking at how to secure your OT and ICS environments. I don't really know from which sector each and every one of you, but we can just assume that all of you deal with OT security. There's no intention to have some sales speech on behalf of Checkpoint. Of course, I represent Checkpoint over here, but the idea is to have an open discussion, generally speaking, about technology, challenges, solutions that all of you are having. So from this is my view for this session. Matt, maybe do you have any objectives for this discussion from your side?
Yeah, so I think making sure that we kind of talk through our different perspectives on what the challenges are in the space. You know, I want to make sure that I'm communicating out the strategic direction of CISA and what we're trying to accomplish from a whole of community and the whole of government approach towards the control system challenges. Make sure that everybody understands kind of how we're prioritizing, how we're looking at this particular problem, some of the things that we're taking on, potentially how you can get involved. I understand, you know, obviously a lot of the control system product companies are international companies. And so, you know, how can we kind of fit them into some of the work that we're doing here? And just make sure that I also am getting your perspective on the priorities and the things that that you feel the U.S. government or maybe governments as a whole should be focused on, and the role that we should play in this space. So those are the types of things that I want to communicate and also really understand from the audience's perspective.
Okay, so maybe we can start from the solution perspective, from the challenges that represent this OT space, and based on that understand what is different in the OT space than in the IT, and why the challenges are creating some need for new kind of solution, new kind of approach from the security perspective. And I think that we can start with talking a bit about the trend of the awareness that we can see in the last, I don't know, 3 to 5 years in the improvement of the need for OT security. And if I'm talking about 3 to 4 years ago, maybe the only motivation was the NERC regulation in the US that was pushing the electricity companies, the utilities, to improve their OT security up to some level according to the requirements of the NERC in the electricity world, which were quite, call it easy kind of requirements. So there was not a heavy need for very in-depth type of security. But definitely this was the first push a few years ago that the industry was moving to the direction of improving security in the OT space. At the same time, when you look at organizations which are not under the regulation, so manufacturing, automotive, and textile, and others that definitely are not subject to any regulation, those were following the trend slowly but surely. And in the last 2 years, I think that definitely for the last year, and let's put the coronavirus aside, we do see not just a trend, we do see a definite need for security coming from every sector, every industry that uses OT technologies, ICS technology. So I think that we are now in a point where everybody understands that there is a need for security. And then the challenges that come with it are something that we have to look at. Is that something that you can agree to?
Yeah, I think you characterized some of the challenges very well, Maddie. I think the way that I look at it, and I think everybody understands kind of how ICS and OT systems are unique and difficult to secure because they are unique and oftentimes very purpose built for the industries that they're supporting and have some very, proprietary aspects to them. I think it's no secret that, many of these were designed and deployed, 30 plus years ago, before really security was really a significant concern. And so they're inherently vulnerable. They also support industries that oftentimes are not easy, where it's not easy to stop the processes. I'm thinking of, iron smelting plants and things of that nature that are designed to be up for years and years. So it's not very easy to kind of take down the control systems, to be able to patch them, et cetera. I think one of the challenges that we have is that that many of the cybersecurity solutions are not easily applied to this environment. So I understand that things like vulnerability scanning and antivirus tools and things of that nature, even censoring traffic, is oftentimes it causes many of the owners and the operators to become very nervous in the sense that you may be disrupting certain messaging protocols, within their environments and things like that. And so that really makes it unique. One of the things that at CISO we're really cognizant of is that, the community itself, and government is just as guilty of this, maybe even more guilty of this than any other, is that we've been somewhat reactive in our ICS security posture. And so, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're getting ahead of some of the emerging and strategic risk areas. So things like, the Internet of Things, the use of 5G and ICS are obviously becoming a reality. And we need to get ahead of the curve on understanding the risks, the vulnerabilities, the threats introduced by these new technologies, and in setting standards for things like secure configurations and deployment, and secure by design requirements to proactively address these issues versus just having them start to happen and we're kind of caught, playing catch up. So those are things that we're very focused on. And one of the other areas I think that's kind of interesting is really from a workforce perspective. So I think, most of you out there in the private sector understand that there's a limited number of experts in industrial control systems, and that this expertise exists in pockets around this community. They exist in obviously the product companies and in sub-elements of large cybersecurity companies and academia. But this area of expertise is kind of niche because it's not only an understanding of cybersecurity, but it's also an understanding of the physical processes and the unique environments that these tools support. So it's also not really a traditional IT security field to get into. And as I'm out meeting with entities, I'm seeing a workforce that quite frankly is aging. And so I see a lot of people that have been working in these environments for decades, and they're getting ready to retire. And so who's going to be that next round of ICS expertise, that next generation of ICS experts? And so I see the workforce is also it being an area of concern. And then lastly, I'll say this from a government perspective, we lack, I think, at least on the US side, a concerted and focused effort on a set of priorities, and at least to date we have, and that's one of the things that we're trying to influence within CISO. There's a lot of great work that's happening, and as I go around and I work with other federal agencies and I visit, the U.S. national labs and I see what's going on, I see areas where there's, absolute overlap and things that we could be learning from one another. And so, one of the areas that I want to make sure that CISO is helping to drive is developing a strategy. And we have one internal to our agency, but I think helping to drive a national strategy, which can include international partners as well, and a plan for what we're going to do within that strategy, which I think is the most important thing. It's easy to say we're going to go do good things, but then specifically, what are we going to do, and are we going to put our money and put our effort and our time behind actually executing on these things? And so I think, absent that, we're going to continue to have what I'll just call scattered effort, which means that you're going to have varying results. And so I think achieving a focus, achieving concerted effort is one of the things one of the challenges I think the community's had, and one of the areas where I think government may be able help bring people together.
Tom, there is a question related to you. Sorry, Matt. Okay, question from Tom. I don't know if you can see the last question in the chat.
Let me open the chat. Let's see here.
The last one.
Yeah. So how does CISA coordinate threats with critical infrastructure, such as DNG and the ISAC? So we have a threat hunting group specific to CISA. We do develop a number of analytic products. I will say that one of the areas that we struggle with is how do we incorporate some of the classified intelligence that we get and bring that down to an unclassified level so that it is usable by some of the critical infrastructure partners. That's been a challenge, and so that's one of the things that we're looking at internally, and how we can bring that information down to the lowest level so that it is actually usable for our critical infrastructure partners. But we have we have groups that produce analytic products, produce alerts that include indicators and things of that nature. We did just recently publish a joint alert. Actually, maybe it wasn't so recently. It was in July with NSA that talks about some of the recommended immediate actions to reduce exposure across OT and ICS, which I thought had some very practical steps in terms of what you can do if you're an owner and an operator and you don't have an unlimited budget. Where would you start if you have a limited budget? So I thought it was fairly useful from that perspective, but would be interested in some of the thoughts from the group as well.
There's a question from Reginald Williams. Can you see that as well? Reginald asks, as we move forward with Industry 4.0, what is the outlook for anomaly detection in the OT space? Maybe
I can relate to that maybe from my perspective. So the question of anomaly detection is related to one of the main challenges that we see in the OT space, and this is the need for visibility, the need for discovery. Meaning when we are coming to a substation or a shop floor of any manufacturing facility, when we look at it from the CISO perspective, he is blind. There's nothing to see over there. We cannot understand what we have, what is there. And therefore, when you're talking about anomaly detection, this is the outcome of a discovery and visibility technology that is required not just for the anomaly detection, because anomaly detection is a passive action. It is non-intrusive because the nature of the discovery technologies that we have today are by default are passive and non-intrusive, and therefore when they generate anomaly detection kind of alerts, they are only providing information for the SOC, for the manager of the network, to be aware that there is a vulnerability, known vulnerability with a CVE, or there is some change in the industrial process in the communication between an HMI and a PLC, or any other type of anomaly detection. You can have many types of anomalies. But practically everything about anomaly detection is the result of asset management, of discovery, of visibility. So the need for visibility is important for the sake of knowing what we have. And then the main question, what do we do with it? Because if we are remaining with the scope of being passive, eventually we don't provide any security. And the security is about enforcement, about the ability to identify anomaly and doing something with that beyond just knowing about it. And this is a big, big difference. And when I talked about trends and changes in the industry, so currently in the last definitely year, we see a massive requirement all over the world for technologies of discovery. Every OT environment is looking to have the ability to understand what they have. But then when we from Checkpoint are coming for those discussions and we are saying, okay, let's have discovery. You know what you have, what are you doing with it? Because knowing that you have a malware or knowing that your furnace was exploded, you don't need a system. It's exploded anyway. So why do you need it? So the idea is to prevent or to be able to do something in advance based on what you have learned in order to set access control in the right way, in order to set internal segmentation, micro-segmentation between different departments, shop floors and production lines, or whatever you look for segmentation. So the idea is to discover, based on that, understand the reality of your network, and as a result of that, improve your policies based on firewalls and enforcement technologies that will make sure that if an attack takes place, it will be prevented, will be eliminated even in advance. So when you're asking about move to Industry 4.0 and anomaly detection, it's not an issue that stands by itself. Anomaly detection is one element out of the chain of discovery, anomaly, policies of security that will make sure that the anomaly will not affect the network in a drastic way or not affect it at all. And this is a long answer to a short question, but it raises the main topic of what does it mean anomaly? Anomaly as a result of what? And the anomaly is a result of the discovery technologies.
Matt, do you have some additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, there's no question that that ideally we'd like to start moving away from more kind of signature-based detection to more activity-based detection. I think a lot of what Maddie is saying makes a lot of sense. You have to understand your assets. You have to understand and baseline, what normal activity looks like within that environment. I think from a CISO perspective, one of the areas that we want to make sure that we're helping to support and drive is coming up with those common standards for being able to share that information. So as detections are made, how do we make it so that the information is non-attributable to the entity that's providing that information out, but there's also enough context there where it's useful to the recipient, and ideally even targeted to that recipient. You're in a certain sector, you have a certain type of control system device where that aligns with the anomalous activity that was detected, and how do we start to streamline that? Would really love to get out of trying to push out PDF products around activities and things of that nature and get more towards the automated sharing of this type of information, so that and have it very targeted to the recipient, so that it is not death by 1,000 alerts, but very kind of highly targeted to who you are and what you have in your environments. And this is, yeah.
There was one person asked me recently, said, are we tracking, are we sharing the right information? I read a report that said in 2019, 74% of OT organizations experienced a data breach, 74%. It doesn't talk about the, how extreme those, events were, but that's a lot of data breaches. What's it like in 2020 based on what you're seeing, both Maddie and Matt? And are we capturing data breaches, and are we sharing that information about those breaches among the community?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give kind of a U.S. government perspective. I mean, we're seeing an uptick. I don't have exact numbers. I think one of the challenges that we have is that the way that we've divvied up kind of the critical infrastructure world is into 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and there's agencies that are in the federal government that are the sector, what we call the sector-specific agency for many of these. So energy, Department of Energy is obviously the SSA for energy, et cetera. And I think there's, it's this dilemma that we have in that, receiving information from these customers, from these victims, is based on trust. They're trusting that the government is not going to disclose that any further than it needs to. Many of these sectors are highly regulated, so there's real financial penalties if breaches are disclosed, and so that kind of breaks the business model of sharing information. And so I think what happens is that tends to cause the sharing of information around data breaches, et cetera, to be kind of very constricted oftentimes within that SSA construct, which makes it very difficult to understand the breadth of the attacks and our particular sectors being targeted and what are the tactics that are being used, et cetera. And so that's a real challenge that we have. And so I'm not entirely sure how we're going to crack that nut. It may require some level of legislative change to really kind of open that up a little bit. And then, of course, there's always some of the turf battles that happen, I think, in government, which are getting broken down, but still sometimes remain, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes not for good reasons. And so those are some of the areas that we're working on streamlining.
And Maddie, as you talk to business leaders in the industry across the globe, what are you hearing?
Okay, so I would like maybe to look at it from another direction. Matt, you have mentioned the report by CISA and NSA that was covering the attack vectors and the risk to the OT world, and the question of how open the world to share events and share breaches. So looking at the list of potential attack vectors and the outcome of those is definitely the reality. On the other hand, you come to an organization and expect him to share what happened. Usually it does not happen. They are not really sharing this information. It's a top secret unless there was something so critical and everything was on the news and every website knew about it. But if it's not the case, companies are quite hesitant in sharing this information, maybe in closed meetings when they are really looking for a solution, then they are describing what happened. And I think the best example that I have, all of us are aware of the attack on the Ukraine electricity company in 2014. 2 years later, a group of the leaders, including the CEO of this company, arrived to Checkpoint headquarters in Tel Aviv for a big meeting. What can you do in order that something like that will never happen again? So, but everybody knew about the details, knew about what happened. In most cases, that's not happening. We don't really know. And that's one of the maybe challenges of this industry, and to share more information for the sake of the others. Maybe it's something that we have to find a way to make it happen. Another aspect of that is coming from another direction. We all know about vulnerabilities, CVEs, information that is related to known, so it knows attack on known vulnerabilities. So it means that when PLC from any of the vendors of the PLCs of the industrial equipment is having, so we came many times to most of the vendors and asked them, can you share with us the feed of the attack? How this vulnerability is being done? How does it do the exploit? Give us the information. As a vendor, we develop signature that can detect and identify the specific attack. And by using IPS technology, which is a standard technology that everybody is having in their firewalls, we can detect and prevent an attack already in the perimeter of the organization and not even in the OT space. I can tell you that from our experience, none of the vendors are willing to share this information. They are publishing their CVs, everything is known, but they are not helping their customers to prevent it. And we all know that in most cases, those patches are not being used, although they are publishing the patches for the vulnerabilities, and the equipment remains unpatched and vulnerable. So this is another direction, how you look at the risk and the sharing of information. I don't really have I didn't hear any good explanation why any of those vendors are sharing this information. It's something that I don't know why. So this is another aspect of the same story.
So staying on that, Tom Stockmeyer had a follow-up question around threat. And Tom, I'm going to unmute you and let you ask that yourself.
No, sure. This is, I guess it's really for both Maddie and Matthew. I'm thinking about the topics that we're discussing. I'm thinking about OT, and it's really more than just critical infrastructure. It spans lots of different industries, right? And there's an ISAC out there called OT ISAC. And I'm wondering how the members in OT ISAC, and if there's a way to reach them with a conversation where we can sort of bridge in collective defense what's going on with some of the technology providers like Checkpoint, but also what CISO is doing and what intel the members are sharing through OT ISAC so that we can build a better collective defense. Because I know that we talk about it a lot, but putting it in action and executing it often proves to be more difficult than anyone would see.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom. I think, regardless of kind of sector or domain, I think, the ISACs have proven to be a great way to kind of bridge between either industries or, state and local, et cetera, and the government, right? Just the ability to kind of reach in deeper, establish a deeper level of trust, and kind of focus on that particular area. I see your comment around the TLP designations and would, designating some of this information as TLP red suffice. I think it's good absent another way to do it. The problem with the traffic light protocol is that it's hard to enforce it. So all of this information goes out. It'll go out with markings and TLP red. Means it can't be shared beyond the original disclosure or the original group. I'm not sure I have that definition absolutely correct, but there's different limitations that are put on it. But there's nothing really preventing you. There's no significant penalty outside of maybe getting put in what we call TLP jail. With that information getting shared further. And so I think it's the enforcement and I think it's the tools that we're using to do this information sharing that are kind of limiting in that way. And I actually was having this conversation recently. We had a management consulting firm come in, and one of the areas that we're talked about is revamping the traffic light protocol and making it an actual policy, and then also looking at maybe some tools that we could put in place to make it so that it was, at least within the confines of an information sharing system, somewhat enforceable and auditable, so that we can make sure that it actually works, that people are willing to share it because they do trust it. Not a full answer, not an easy thing to solve. I think there's different approaches that we can take to solving it, and certainly willing to lean into that a little bit more and see if there's something we could do and with the OTI SAC in that space.
No, I'd love to chat with you. We can take it offline. I don't want to drill down too deep in this during your session, but we could take it offline. I know through Sticks packages and 2.1, you can strip out attribution and some things like that. And I think technology can be an enabler, and I'd love to have that conversation.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Maddie, did you want to respond?
No, I don't have something specific for that. I do see other questions coming from Joe, and that's the only one. Joe Weiss. And,
yeah,
so
and let's let me get over. Let me find Joe. I know he's in here somewhere. And Joe, I'm going to unmute you. I know you said it's not specifically related to control systems, but please feel free to ask your question, Joe.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thanks. By the way, I'm trying to listen also. CISA has this education webinar going on as we speak out at Idaho. But anyways, a couple of points. First of all, people haven't defined what OT is. You're basically talking about OT as if it's just another network. The real issue we have is control systems. I don't want to even use the word industrial. Control systems because it's manufacturing, medical, transportation, you name it. Industrial, I helped coin the term years ago because we didn't think about all of these others. But the very first thing is, the only thing that really, really, really distinguishes a control system from IT are the control system devices, sensors, actuators, drives, analyzers, you name it. There is no cybersecurity, there is no authentication, there is no cyber logging. You have no visibility at this layer. Yet this is the heart of safety. This is the only thing that makes them different. All you've been talking about is the vulnerability of networks. Maddie, you even mentioned the idea of that some of these things affected the networks. Nobody said a word about affecting the actual process. You know, keeping lights on and water flowing, that's what we're supposed to be caring about, not networks. So that's a very, very, very big problem. Second of all, I was at NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. We were talking about the lack of information sharing or knowing what was going on. Maddie, you talked about going to vendors. One of the things the vendors told us is they have access from their customers of actual incidents, et cetera, et cetera. Contractually, they're not allowed to share it. It was kind of an amazing statement as we're sitting there. They're aware they can't even share it with their other customers. You know, you want a policy or governance issue to address. What do we do? The OTISAC isn't going to help anybody. I think people have to get rid of that right away. What does get shared is by trust. When I used to have the ICS Cybersecurity Conference, long before Security Week bought it from me, it was essentially the only place where the control system people would actually share actual control system cyber incidents, not vulnerabilities, incidents. Why? They wanted to find out if others had the same thing happen to them.
So, hey,
You know,
Joe, this is Patrick.
Yeah.
I think you've raised a number of good points, and I'm going to cut you off because there are other questions coming in.
Not a problem, but I just wanted to get that across. Is
No, and we definitely appreciate it. And I'm going to give each of the speakers a chance to respond to you, but I also want to talk to Arlen McFarlane in Chicago and some other folks that are asking questions. So let Matt and Maddie respond to some of the points you made, which I know you and I have talked about a number of times in recent weeks and months, Joe. So I don't know which one of you want to start first. Maddie, you want to leap into this?
Oh, okay. Yes. First, hello, Joe. How are you? I hope you are well. Yeah, when you're talking about assets and you're talking about the need for discovery, and maybe I use the word network, but this is my English, but definitely I meant the detection, the discovery, the vulnerabilities of the assets in level 1, level 2 of the Purdue model networks. So whenever I'm talking about the discovery, I'm referring to the assets themselves, referring to the baseline behavior of the communication between one asset to the other. And when we're referring to vulnerabilities and CVEs, those are not of the network, those are the CVEs of the actual PLCs, HMIs, and everything that runs in this environment. So yes, you're definitely right, and maybe I was not accurate enough in the way that I presented the things, but that's definitely what I was referring to. And I fully agree that OT network has nothing to do with any other network, or industrial or control systems are unique. And because of the fact that they are unique, we need the discovery. We need to understand what is what, who communicates with whom, in what way, and generate as a result of that anomaly detection alerts. But I extend it to the part which maybe is more or less discussed is the need to provide enforcement, the need to learn the normal behavior, and based on that, set policies, set restrictions, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And of course, this is open to a lot of discussion, how much deep we can get into enforcement in the OT environment. And I do know, and I believe that you will agree with me, the word of prevention that is very popular in the IT environment is less popular or not relevant in the OT networks. Nobody would like to interfere or have some false positive because of security policy to the industrial process, which is the most important thing. And that's definitely an important, I think, point. And thanks for raising, you know, the accuracy of the terminology over here, which is very important. So in that aspect, yes, you're definitely right. And maybe I was not explaining in the right way, but that was the idea.
Yeah, Joe, I appreciate your passion and appreciate your involvement in this community for a long time. And I've heard a lot about you and have read some of your posts and out in LinkedIn, et cetera. So appreciate all of that. I think there's no doubt that, and I'm just going to focus on the lack of the information sharing piece of this. So there's no doubt that trust is a key aspect. But I think there's also a need to kind of dig deeper and think about what types of activities would we want to jointly engage where we've got asset owners and operators, control system product vendors, and government and control system security focused companies working together. And what are the motivators kind of within each of those areas? You know, I think about control system vendors are, you know, they want to make money. They want to be seen as a trusted provider of control systems to the owners and operators. And they want for their intellectual property to be kept confidential from competitors and not to be used against them in other countries. Asset owners really want to have insight into their specific control system vulnerabilities and whether the vendors are moving to remediate certain vulnerabilities. They want to potentially, you know, bind together with other asset owners and cause that change in the control system vendor world. And so how does government help to facilitate that trusting relationship and act as a mechanism to be able to support whether it's you know, vulnerability assessment within product lines, sharing of common vulnerabilities within product lines in a very private way, not in a naming and shaming type of way. So how can we facilitate that to at the end of the day, make sure that the critical infrastructure in our various countries are supported by control systems that are secure as they can be. And so those are the types of things that I'm really interested in. Would love to kind of get your perspective on that. And so again, appreciate your comments.
Great. I think Arlen McMillan, who I know is in Chicago, and I can't remember your law firm, Arlen, but I'm going to unmute you and let you raise your point.
Okay, great. And here I thought I was going to be able to get away with just typing something in the chat. So, right, I'm the CISO for Kirkland & Ellis, prior CISO for United Airlines and the city of Chicago. So somewhat familiar with critical infrastructure. You know, there's very little I disagree with anything being said. I want to be clear about that. I think this is all very directionally correct, and appreciate the panelists here. The one thought I have, though, you know, putting aside everything, the very important conversation, Matt, that you were bringing up about information sharing and trust, and how do we, you know, the old, how do the good guys work together better, because we know the bad guys are. And that's a tough nut to crack, and I don't know the answer there. I think Susan, I think folks in FBI, DHS, DOD, I think are doing a real great job. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And you stole one of my guys from the city of Chicago. He's working for me currently, so I still have a little bit of a grudge there. But Matt, I'll forgive you in a decade or so. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
He was one of my best.
Yeah.
Still holding a grudge, but maybe I'll let go of that. Hope he's doing you well. Good guy.
Yeah.
But more around IoT and just, it feels like we may be misfocusing, right? So putting aside SCADA and all of the industrial control systems, which are dinosaurs. And because they're dinosaurs, they're just rife with problems. Putting aside all of that, IoT doesn't fix that, it just makes it worse, right? And the only way that I see us potentially correcting that is a rip and replace. Everything else is a Band-Aid. And I don't see any motivation to rip and replace. But specifically on IoT, it just feels like there's a little bit of a misfocus there. These things are just computers. These are just technology on a network. Now, they're underpowered and they're lower capability, which runs into its own sorts of problems on how do you patch them, how do you manage them. But the fact is that these things, while dumb right now, are only going to get smarter and more powerful. They're just devices, they're just nodes on a network. So it feels to me that maybe there's a little bit of a, I don't want to call it misunderstanding, but just not looking at these in that light, and how do we go about putting the controls in place that we've done for all of these other assets on our network for these. Maddie, I know you're doing a lot of work in this space, so just wanted to get that out there and how to address that situation.
Maybe just a question from my side. What, to your definition, is IoT devices? Which kind of devices are IoT, unlike ICS or industrial IoT? There are so many terminologies that maybe we are quite.
Yeah, so to a point that somebody made earlier, that we don't have a definition of IoT. One of the reasons why we don't have a definition of IoT is because I think it's artificial to try to put a definition on it. And that's part of my point. There is no such thing as IoT. IoT has just simply been called something which is a less capable device. It's just a device, and you have to manage it. Now, I think there's been a little bit of an excuse. Well, these are less capable devices. They're single purpose devices. You know, they're stripped down OSs, but they've got an OS.
So maybe I can offer another definition. Maybe we can define IoT devices or versus ICS assets or devices according to the location, to the environment in which those devices are installed. So if we're looking at the enterprise environment, we would say that smart office, like smart TVs and videos and access control to the office, everything about smart office, all of that is enterprise IoT. We do have the building management systems that some people are mistakenly calling them IoT. I would call them BMS systems. They have their own definition and their own type of protocols that they're using. So they have their own identity. They are different than those in the smart office. And then when we come to the medical environment, we have medical devices and so on and so on. And when it comes to the ICS, although this is a dinosaur, yes, correct, but this dinosaur will stay with us for the next 30 years at least. Maybe more, maybe less, I don't know. But the definition, probably the right way to define is according to where those devices are being used. And of course, what is the type of activity they perform. So I don't think that we can compare a PLC to a camera. Those have two different aspects. Or if you have a sensor, which is industrial IoT or IoT device in a shop floor environment, it still does something else than a physical lock on the door in the office. And therefore, the protocols, then all of that is different.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed, especially if you want to take a look at doing some behavioral profiling. Absolutely, these are different types of devices. but in a way, outside of doing behavioral profiling, I think there is a danger, there's a trap that we can get ourselves into by acting like enterprise IoT or that IoT or this IoT is anything really special. Sure, enterprise IoT, security camera or a TV, they're going to behave differently, just as devices deployed into an ICS environment is going to deploy differently. These are just characteristics of those devices. So I think that there is an inherent trap that we may be setting ourselves for by acting like there are different sector type devices, right? These are just computers. These are just devices that are perhaps special built and lower powered, but they fundamentally have all the same management requirements, is the point that I think I'm trying to make.
I understand and agree, and maybe here for the first time I will talk on behalf of Checkpoint, although this is not the purpose of this event. But Checkpoint defined a strategy of everything which is connected as a single strategy in terms of cybersecurity. And under this, everything is connected. We have looked at all the sectors that are using connected devices, and we have decided to focus on three major areas which definitely are the most important to the safety of our life in this world. So one is in the industrial world, another one is in the enterprise world, and the third one is the medical world. But when we are looking at all of those three, which are definitely different than each other, all of them have the same characteristic. All of them requires discovery. All of them requires patches and stuff that nobody is really thinking of patching a camera or patching a smart TV in the office. The same as for a PLC or an HMI, the same as a medical device. So in that aspect, the characteristic of all of those are identical. We need discovery, we need risk assessment, and we need segmentation or micro-segmentation, and we need enforcement. In that aspect, you are definitely touching the point, and I fully agree with that, that all of them have the same common challenges and the same type of solutions in terms of security. Of course, when you talk about sector by sector, there are characteristics, different protocols, different environment, different regulation, by the way. And the regulation definitely is a major factor when you come to a medical environment or you come to electricity company. Unlike in the office, there is no regulatory issues at all and so on. So, but technically speaking, yes, you're right. And if this CPU power of today will be stronger tomorrow, it doesn't make a big difference. It's the same concept, the same challenge. So I fully agree with you, but it's easy to divide those words today still to the characteristic that each and everyone is having and look at it separately, although they are quite similar.
So moderator, this is where you need to cut me off or else I'll keep on asking these guys questions.
That's all right. We're okay on time. I do want to get ready to, we've got about 20 minutes before we finish. So Arlen, if you have one more point you want to make, please feel free to do so. And I know Matt is eager to respond to the first one. You want to respond first, Matt, or?
No, I think so, Arlen. Appreciate your comments. I think, yeah, it's a challenging area, right? These are systems that are designed to be up for decades. They cost a ton of money. They're huge capital investments by these entities. It's not easy to rip and replace them. I think, we're doing things today that we need to do, such as, asset management and patching and things of that nature. But I also think that there's probably, areas that government can support research and study and development would be on some of the longer term things that we can do to make it so that these environments are less vulnerable. So there's some good studies that are out there that are being done on kind of what's called the DIE methodology. Check out Sunil Yu on YouTube when you get a chance. DIE stands for distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. Some of these I think probably apply to, it's generally applies to cybersecurity, but you could see aspects of it architecturally maybe applying to OT type environment. So distributed in the sense that if you take down a capability, it's no problem. It's virtualized, so you spin it back up. immutable in the sense that if the configuration data is stolen, it's not really worth anything to anybody because it's encrypted, ephemeral. If you steal passwords or gain access, that's okay. That password is only good for a few minutes. I think areas like that could be areas that government looks to start investing in to really significantly make it harder for adversaries to compromise us. But that doesn't mean that we can't stop doing what we're doing today, or even do things in kind of a midterm. So if we're playing if we're playing a game of whack-a-mole today, how do we do that better? Because we still need to play that game while we're waiting for these future capabilities to be in place, and that takes investment and that takes focus. But even in the midterm, what are some of the architectural changes that we can make? What are some of the things that we can do to make it harder for adversaries to take advantage of us? Like deceptive networks and things of that nature, being better at anomaly detection, to give our defenders more of a fighting chance. I think there's the short term, we've got to keep doing what we're doing today, but we've got to do it better. There's a midterm, which is how do we make it harder for those adversaries while we're waiting for the future? But then I think there's a long-term investment in how do we make it so that it's so that we don't have to keep playing the game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was a individual put something in the chat there about can't rip and replace because the capabilities aren't there, or there aren't secure replacement options. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's directionally correct. But if I can direct something at you first, Matt, then Maddie. I am of the minority. NIST has done an amazing job. The government has done an amazing job in influencing without directly providing regulation to state thou shalt. And I am in the minority that strongly believes that if we are to have significant or rapid gain improvement in our security environment of our nation and of our critical infrastructure, that you do have to have perhaps not an FAA-like approach to dictating how technologies will be managed within all 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Perhaps it doesn't have to be as stringent as FAA and transportation, but I do strongly believe that a much stronger hand in dictating minimum posture has to be put forward if we're going to make significant gains. I believe further that if we do that, then things will become more available. Because in the end, there is everyone will seek the lowest level just for financial purposes. And that's part of the reason why we have the problems that we have today. So a general comment, I'm not even sure, Matt, if you're even allowed to take a position on that. But let me just put that out there. And Maddie, if I may be so bold to ask you just one more question around your thinking in terms of medical or enterprise. I know there was one other, pardon me, I can't remember the other area. Why do you feel it beneficial or necessary to group IoT in these three major categories?
Maybe can you repeat the question? What is my opinion?
Sure.
About what?
Sure. You mentioned that Checkpoint is grouping IoT in enterprise, medical, and there was one other, and I missed.
The industrial world, the ICS.
And of course, thank you. Why do you feel it beneficial to group in these major groupings?
Okay. The reason to group them, there are two main reasons. One, marketing reasons. Okay, we would like to have, to approach different markets, so it's easy to look at it marketing-wise as one entity. Why? Because you're talking about environments which are typically quite similar to each other. You do have strange kind of devices connected to a network. Strange would be medical devices or cameras or smart TVs or PLCs, HMIs, or so on. Because why? They are not IT. and that's why they have a typical behavior. All of those devices are neglected along the years when it comes to cybersecurity. And therefore, when we are looking at the challenge that all of those three brings to the industry, they are very similar to each other. And therefore, when we come to provide a solution to secure those, it's a similar solution. It is the need for discovery, visibility, the need for anomaly detection, the need for enforcement, which is dedicated to this environment, which in some cases you're not allowed to do prevention because in the ICS world you don't do prevention. Maybe when it comes to the enterprise IoT, you set policies in the firewall instead of being only passive policies, you just change the configuration to be active and you can prevent. But the solution looks the same. The concept, the challenges are similar. And that's why we group them. And that's why we have a single approach to all of those three, from the simple reason that we have the same story for all of them in terms of how to provide security. One more point. Yeah, please.
No, pardon me. No, I was just about to say that makes a lot of sense. It's less about the device and more about the solutioning of how to protect that environment. And I'm going to permanently put myself on mute from here on in. Y'all have been very generous with allowing me to ask so many questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The whole idea of these events is to have a conversation. We're not doing slides. We're not doing presentations. We're having conversations because that's how we build trust. That's how we learn from each other. And, you know, the NTSC always tries to bring CISA into these conversations with other thought leaders like Maddie. I'm going to close it out by asking both of you sort of my question. And as I listen to what we've talked about today, you know, we have a rapid pace of change. Things are changing rapidly. We're dealing with legacy software. We basically have no encryption. A lot of these are dumb devices. There's a lack of visibility. Organizations are being breached. They're struggling for personnel. You raise a point, Matt, about an aging cyber workforce. Recent statistics in CyberSeek said that over 50% of the current workforce is baby boomers and Generation X. So over the next decade, we're going to see a massive change in the organization. You know, which goes to the whole hype about, you know, the lack of cyber people. We have to figure out exactly where that is. So we have all of these things that they got raised today. Not everybody is not everybody works for Tom Fanning at Southern Company and has a chairman who understands cyber the way Tom Fanning does and is willing to invest the way Tom Fanning does. A lot of companies have to make decisions based on limited budgets, risk, a lot of other parameters. So as we close out, I would love for each of you to you know, as two of the recognized thought leaders, to tell us what your recommendations are to those companies that don't have extensive budgets. You know, what are the 3, 5, 7, whatever your number is, things you absolutely need to do in order to protect your environment? I won't say network, your ICS environment. What are the things that you recommend? And I'll let Maddie start that out.
Okay, thank you. This is a very good question. Since I'm representing a security vendor, which is famous for being the company that invented the firewall, our CEO, currently 25 years already, is the person that has the patent of the firewall. So in that aspect, he has a lot of respect in the industry. So what I would suggest as a result of that is that we would start always with segmentation between IT and OT environment. So this would be the first line of defense next to the perimeter and everything about IT security. So discovery, not discovery, let's make sure that communication between OT and IT is well managed for the purposes of course, allowing the right communication between IT to OT to run smoothly, and in addition to that, to allow remote access for remote maintenance, which is usually the case in manufacturing and other sectors as well. So this will be the first and maybe the most important security element when it comes to a limited budget environment and organization, but don't give up on those basic firewalls that will provide the access control between the IT and OT. This would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I think Matty hit a lot of what we would recommend. I think understanding your environment, understanding the devices that are on it, understanding which ones are internet accessible, and you can do that. There's a number of data sources out there, such as Shodan, where you can actually look up and see whether they are or are not. Making sure that remote connectivity to your OT networks and devices are reduced as much as possible. I would say making sure that you have kind of a resilience plan in place. So, have a plan in place for being able to continue manual processes should your control systems become unavailable. Make sure that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities within your organization for OT network and device restoration, and exercising that incident response plan, so that that you're not making key decisions in the heat of battle, but you're doing that beforehand, and really understanding who has the authority to make those decisions within your organization. So those would be some of the basic things that I think are relatively low cost that you can almost do yourself to help prepare.
And I want to reinforce the importance of exercise, of practice. One of our policy council members is Roy Hadley, who was the attorney who handled the city of Atlanta during the ransomware attack. And he said the things that you learn in an attack of that magnitude that you never prepared for, like, where are you going to get the budget to go buy 700 new laptops and things like that. Really important. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that today is the 245th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. So I'll say Semper Fi to my Marine Corps. And, that's an organization that makes sure everybody practices a lot and is ready when they hit the field. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Matt, thank you very much for being here today. We love the support and attention we get from CISA. You're just, I can't tell Mr. Krebs, I can't thank him enough for all of the support he gives us. Maddie, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Checkpoint, for being a major underwriter for the NTSC in 2020. We appreciate your support, both financially and all the work that you've done with us this past year. So with that, I will sign off. This recording will be available on our website within the next 2 days. You can go to www.ntsc.org. Again, ntsc.org. Probably the day after tomorrow, we'll do a little editing on it, and it'll be available for if you want to share it with anybody. So thank you again, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon. And next event is on December 4th, where we'll have Jason Whitty, who is the Global Chief Information Security Officer for JP Morgan Chase, and Brett Arsenault, who's the Global CISO for Microsoft, talking about Zero Trust. Ought to be an interesting conversation. So thanks, everybody. Have a lovely day.
Thanks a lot. Bye, Matt. Bye, Patrick.
Thanks, Matty. Take care now. Thanks, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.